Good news, Portland unemployment is down and Oregon's economic forecast is good. So I guess everything is fixed now, right?
You know, I mean, times are already tough for me, and then they just got even tougher.
No, of course things aren't fixed. Thousands of people are still out of work or have had their hours cut. And now, on top of that, some are finding out their wages are being garnished, thanks to long-forgotten medical bills.
I'm already pinching pennies to get by, and now I get to pinch them even more.
Permit or no permit, the Proud Boys won a rally in Vanport this weekend. And the KGW Vault has a reminder of why some, including Mayor Wheeler, aren't okay with them picking that particular location. And to them, losing Ruth Bader Ginsburg wasn't just the loss of a Supreme Court justice. It was the loss of a hero.
Like, this can't possibly become any worse.
Here's the story.
I am Dan Haggerty. Hello, welcome to The Story. Sometimes people write me on Facebook. They wonder if it is actually me who is responding to them. Maybe perhaps it's somebody on the team here at The Story. So to the person who I went back and forth with for about 45 minutes at 9:15 this morning about the Breonna Taylor case, yes, it is me. And if there's something on your mind that you think I should know, you can find me on Facebook too at Dan Haggerty KGW, or look me up on Instagram, or email us here at The Story at thestory@kgw.com, or use Twitter and the hashtag HeyDan. So, in the meantime, we should probably do the news. And I want to start the show tonight with two headlines that were billed as good news. First, this one. Oregon's revenue forecast increases by $2 billion thanks to an uptick in taxes and lottery money. If that forecast is accurate, it would mean COVID-19 barely put a dent in Oregon's budget. So, go Oregon economy, I guess. The second piece of news is Portland-centric, and it was a city jobs report presented yesterday. With the help of a slideshow with maybe one of the most ridiculous titles we've ever seen during a public meeting, asking, "What hath 2020 wrought?" It's a play on "What has God done?" It's from the Bible. But it's more good news. The jobs report from August found Portland unemployment fell from 11% to 8.3%. And that is goodish news, I guess. Though 8.3% of Portland equates to tens of thousands of people, I guess it is good news, if that is what good news is nowadays. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm glad there are bright spots in our economic outlook. It is certainly better than the alternative, but it is hard to celebrate something like that when I get emails every single day like this one from Michael Lauterbach. "Hey Dan, I filed for unemployment at the end of July and have yet to receive a check." Or this note from Jill Presley back in July. "My unemployment benefits arrived nearly 5 months after I applied. Although I'm very grateful, I can't help to think how it might have been if I'd been trying to support a family instead of just myself." So if you're wondering what hath 2020 wrought, the real answer is stories like those. Too many of them and not enough solutions. So, for tonight's big story, we want to focus on some of the people who are barely getting by. Those people who haven't gotten their jobs back yet or have had their hours dramatically cut. And on top of that, Kyla Boshi learned some of them are even having their wages garnished to help pay off old debts.
At a time when people are struggling,
the coronavirus pandemic has left millions of Americans out of work in just this
crisis. There's the huge economic toll on American families.
Studying evidence of an economy that suddenly hit a brick wall. Going from 50
private debt collectors are garnishing wages. They're taking money out of people's paychecks when they can least afford it.
For them to start garnishing during a time when people are really, truly struggling, it's ridiculous.
Dina MacGyver was living paycheck to paycheck before the pandemic hit. Now, the Beaverton woman is in danger of not being able to make rent after a private debt collector started garnishing her wages. In July, Ray Klein Inc., or Professional Credit Service, started taking about 20% of Dina's paycheck. It was a significant hit, especially after her work hours had been cut during the pandemic.
I'm already pinching pennies to get by, and now I get to pinch them even more. I hope I like ramen noodles.
The debt is from nearly 10 years ago, when Dina got treatment at Providence Portland Medical Center. Over the past decade, she'd lost track of how much she owed, moved a couple of times, and says she never heard from Providence again. At some point, Providence, one of the country's largest and richest hospital chains, referred Dina's old medical bills to Ray Klein.
The thing is this debt is more than 10 years old.
Garnishments can happen after a debt collector or creditor files a small claim and gets a judgment against someone who owes them money. Some people aren't even aware of the court proceedings because they haven't been informed. When they don't show up, a judge can issue a default, allowing the debt collector to go ahead and take a portion of their wages.
I haven't seen a single letter from them or a phone call or even, anything, an email, anything to just say, hey, can you pay us? Can we work this thing out? I could have had it paid off years ago if I knew about it.
Phil White had long forgotten about his old medical bills from Providence, Portland. He'd since moved to Sacramento. But in June, a debt collector suddenly started garnishing his wages.
Times are already tough for me, and then they just got even tougher.
Despite various protections for people struggling to pay student loans, mortgages, or rent during the coronavirus pandemic, only a handful of states have stopped debt collectors from moving ahead with wage garnishments, and many of those protections have now been rescinded. In Oregon, there's no special help for indebted consumers during the pandemic. Instead, it's business as usual for debt collectors. A review of court records found since April, there have been more than 500 judgments in Multnomah County alone, allowing the garnishment of wages.
We're looking at a big ding out of every paycheck that I get.
The collection agency, Ray Klein, deferred to Providence for comment. In a written statement, a Providence spokesperson said, Providence's goal is to avoid sending any account to collections, and we have steps built in to provide multiple opportunities for patients to work along with us to resolve or eliminate account balances. Additionally, Providence said during the pandemic, it has asked the collection agencies it works with, including Ray Klein, to implement immediate action such as ceasing to charge interest, postponing litigation proceedings, and deferring payment plans. But despite that request, Ray Klein still filed court papers for garnishment of wages against Dina in July, right in the middle of a pandemic. She's since moved out of her apartment and moved in with her brother. The garnishment of wages can be crippling, especially for those barely getting by during a pandemic.
Okay, Kyle Aboshi joining us now. So Providence told the debt collector to postpone the legal proceedings, but obviously that did not happen. What now?
Right, and we pushed Providence on this. They said, listen, we're going to go back to these debt collection agencies we work with and make sure they clearly understand these legal proceedings should not be moving forward. Worth noting as well, Providence sent us quite a detailed outline of steps it takes to work with people who simply can't pay. Their point is, deal with this on the front end. Deal with it when it's the hospital, not when it gets to a third-party debt collector, because it's a much different situation then.
You've done a lot of stories throughout all this, not just on medical bills, but aggressive debt collecting in a couple different forms. What have you been able to kind of figure out doing all these different stories?
Right, and in this series, The Cost of Collections, we've really focused on the city of Portland and the fact it sets people to collections as well. And what's interesting, and during the course of reporting on this particular story, I found another case where a woman is having her wages garnished. She works at Dollar Tree. Why? Because of an old water bill with the city of Portland. What was interesting to me is you've got the city of Portland here that's asking for leniency from landlords, for instance, not to evict renters. But what is it doing? It's garnishing the wages from a woman who works at Dollar Tree for an old water bill.
All right, Kyle Aboshi, we look forward to your further reporting. Appreciate it.
So it is safe to say that the lull in protests is over. Dozens of demonstrators, they were back in front of the Multnomah County Justice Center last night after a grand jury in Louisville decided not to charge any officer in the death of Breonna Taylor. Now, obviously, that case has taken on a national significance in the broader Black Lives Matter movement. So a familiar pattern emerged last night in Portland. Passionate speeches at peaceful protests earlier in the day that gave way to violent protests at night. Police eventually declaring a riot after people started fires and threw rocks through windows of the downtown Central Precinct building. And in probably the craziest video, this one, and you'll see another angle in just a second, somebody threw a Molotov cocktail into a group of officers and it burst into flames. This happened 3 times. Look at this video. You see that officer's foot and the bottom of his leg was on fire as he was running to safety. That's what's happening in Portland last night. In the end, 13 people were arrested, including one person charged with attempted murder. Meanwhile, police in Louisville arrested 127 people, and 2 officers working the protests were shot. They're expected to live and recover. So tensions are high again. And it's in this environment that a right-wing group called the Proud Boys plans to hold a rally this Saturday at Delta Park in North Portland, which will likely draw counter-protesters. It's a dynamic that Portland Police Chief Chuck Lavelle is very aware of.
My hope is that they'll stay in the areas that they're talking about right now. Our goal and our hope is that they do not try to come together and have altercations or conflict with one another, but at the same time, we don't always get to control that either. Our plan is to have a very visible presence and to be very visible.
Something tells me everybody's going to be very visible down there. We mentioned yesterday the Proud Boys had applied for a permit for their protest, but the city denied them that permit over coronavirus concerns. And after that story, we got this question from Me Lewis on Twitter. Hey, Dan, can you get an answer? Why a group of rioters is allowed, but not a group that tried to obtain a permit? And I kind of get why you're asking that question, but the answer is really easy. Rioting isn't allowed, technically speaking. It's a crime. I understand that our DA isn't charging people with low-level offenses once police declare a riot, but the people in those videos throwing the rocks and the fire bombs, they are standing before a judge. 6 people were charged with rioting last night in Portland. It seems silly to say, but you can't get a permit to riot. And really, you don't need a permit to protest at all. I mean, unless the protest could violate a law like blocking traffic, for instance. And even then, prosecuting protesters who are blocking traffic is extremely unlikely because the First Amendment gives a lot of leeway to protesters. So not having a permit hasn't stopped protests in the past, and it's probably not going to stop Saturday's rally either. But if things go sideways, Portland police may have their work cut out for them. Oregon State Police and the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office say they're not going to help Portland with crowd control, and it's because the mayor of Portland banned the use of tear gas a few weeks ago.
A running theme of Portland's protests has been its use of tear gas, or CS gas, and now Portland police can't use it at all. So how did we get here? Protests nationwide and in Portland began in late May after George Floyd's death. The Portland Police Bureau declared their first riot on Friday, May 29th. A week later, on Friday, June 5th, the group Don't Shoot PDX sued Portland over the Bureau's use of tear gas. That Tuesday, June 9th, a federal judge ruled in favor of Don't Shoot PDX and issued a 14-day temporary restraining order on PPB using tear gas, saying PPB has regularly used tear gas to disperse peaceful protesters. The only exception was if there was a risk to public or police safety, which is technically already the rule, but here we are. The same judge extended the restraining order, but it didn't apply to federal police, who continued gassing protesters and rioters, and on Wednesday, July 22nd, Mayor Wheeler as well, who later said, "I saw nothing which provoked this response, and it's got to stop now." About a week later, the feds agreed to pull back. There were periodic protests in other parts of Portland when police launched tear gas in East Portland neighborhoods. But it hit a breaking point on Saturday, September 5th, the 100th consecutive day of protesting. Protesters and police clashed in a Southeast Portland neighborhood, and police used tear gas, which got into the homes of people like Timur Ender.
I don't know why you have to gas half of East Portland because there's a dumpster fire.
Then, 2 weeks ago, on Thursday, September 10th, the mayor made the call. No more CS gas by Portland police at all, saying we need something different. We need it now. And that leads us to this week, where the city is preparing for a potentially ugly confrontation in North Portland, where right-wing Proud Boys are planning on holding a rally. Because of Mayor Wheeler's tear gas ban, both the Oregon State Police and the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office say they won't help Portland police with crowd control at all. Portland is on its own, and that's how we got here.
Welcome back to the story. How are the commercials? Good? Good. Before the break, we were talking about how the city denied the right-wing group, the Proud Boys, a permit to rally this Saturday in North Portland. The official reason being because of coronavirus. The city just isn't handing out permits to protests of any kind. And we checked on this. They haven't for the time being. But for Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler, there's another reason to oppose the rally, and it has to do with where the Proud Boys want to gather. Wheeler wrote an op-ed in the Portland Tribune saying, on Saturday, September 26th, a group of far-right extremists and white nationalist groups will be coming to our city. They have announced plans to gather at Delta Park, the location of the historic Vanport city, which has important historical context. He continued, Vanport was created as a temporary housing project to keep black residents out of Portland. It was also the site of a devastating flood in 1948. Intentional or not, these groups choosing Delta Park for this event is an insult. Now, the history of Vanport is a long one, and it touches on some really raw topics that we're still grappling with today. For more, let's go into the KGW vault.
The city of Vanport was built during World War II in North Portland, right where Delta Park is today. At the time, it was the second largest city in Oregon and the largest federal housing project in the country, home to more than 40,000 people. About 40% of the population was black. Most people worked in the Kaiser shipyards for the war effort, but a lot of them left town when the war ended. By 1948, the population had essentially been cut in half, and that is when disaster struck. On Memorial Day, the Columbia River breached the railroad levee, spilling into Vanport and destroying the city. At least 17 people died.
It was the worst weather disaster in the United States in 1948, and so it had national and international news. President Truman came and he said we should rebuild it. However, the city fathers at that time did not want it rebuilt. They wanted Vanport essentially gone and erased, which is part of the reason that so few people know about Vanport today.
But the city left a legacy behind, helping integrate Portland and Oregon, a state that not long before had very few black people due to its black exclusion laws.
These were strangers, 40,000 strangers, who created a community. And when that community was disrupted, they brought that community feeling right into Portland and changed it from extremely conservative to what we have now.
The issues of home, displacement, and community that Vanport really helps us dig into are still clearly issues that the whole country and the city of Portland are facing. I mean, the city of Vanport was built because there was not enough housing.
The Vanport Mosaic Festival was held every year in May, complete with the Day of Remembrance, to talk about the history of Vanport and what our community can continue to learn from it.
The Vault is one of our most popular segments here on The Story. We know that because every time we air one, we get a lot of emails from a lot of you wondering about some other stuff that we might find down there. So keep those coming. That usually is what kind of drives us to go down there and start looking around. You can email us at thestory@kgw.com or tweet us using the hashtag HeyDan. There's also an entire playlist of some of our old Vault segments up on the KGW YouTube channel. So if you're new to the show, we might already have kind of ventured down there and checked something out that you're interested in. So you should check this out. And while you're there, hit that subscribe button. So the death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg means a lot of things, politically, historically, judicially. But for some, it's a lot more of a personal thing. They lost a hero. Our Maggie Vespa spent a couple of days talking to some women who work in law across Portland and Oregon about what losing RBG means to them.
Justice Bader Ginsburg passed away Friday. How did you find out, and how did that hit you?
Yeah. I mean, it's wild because oftentimes you feel like, I don't think life could get any worse, right? Like, this can't possibly become any worse.
The smoke had been here, and it was the first day that it was clearing and feeling like maybe we were going to get clear. And I came home from Salem and I was going to go out on a run for the first time in felt like a long time. And then I heard a pinging on my phone. You know, all it had to say was RBG. And then the sky started to cry. And then I started to cry. And it was very hard.
You mentioned it, and that you know her personally. That stems back to her 2008 visit to Willamette University. You introduced her.
I did, and it was a great honor to introduce her. But the most meaningful interaction I had with her was about 20 minutes one-on-one that we had before we went on stage. She had taken the time to read my current scholarship on constitutional sentencing, in her free time, and then proceeded to ask me about it and quiz me about it. And I think that was really emblematic of how she was. She was always interested in the next generation, the younger women, right? How are they going to carry on the fight?
I mean, she definitely paved the way for women lawyers to not only exist, but to have, I think, the rights that we can experience in the workplace. Sometimes I have to deal with the misconceptions about what I bring to the table because I am Black and because I am a woman. But when I look at women like Justice Ginsburg, I'm reminded that my job is to be an excellent advocate and to continue to chip away at this notion of what a lawyer looks like or what a lawyer sounds like.
Those who don't remember the past may be condemned to repeat it. We today often forget that there was not always the 19th Amendment. In fact, until 1920, we did not have the right to vote in federal elections. And as Justice Ginsburg once said, women belong in all places where decisions are made.
I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that people still want to go to law school, right? And that they still want to fight the fight, because there's many times I think many of us feel like, oh my God, what a show. Like, I can't do this anymore. But it's encouraging to know that people still want to go to law school, still want to fight for equality, fight for justice.
So we've reached the end of the story for tonight, and here we are again, kind of sandwiched between the calm between two storms. On one hand, we have last night's protest against the Breonna Taylor decision and scenes like this. And on the other, we have the anxiety about what may happen if tensions burst during Saturday's planned rally. For people out there passionate about social justice, last night's decision in the Taylor case is yet another blow in a year full of them. Woodlawn Elementary School teacher, the man you see there, Lionel Clegg, is one of those people, and he's someone who we've heard from on these types of topics for about a year now as we've covered Woodlawn. So in lieu of comments tonight, we're going to end the show with his thoughts on what happened last night in Louisville. Have a good night.
Like, how is that justice? Like, I've talked to friends of color, and it's like, I tell them, truthfully speaking, I said, they try to show you every day that we are not welcomed in this country, and this is not our country. And I don't know why we are not believing that, because each and every day we see different circumstances and issues that are giving us that understanding that we are not welcomed here to a large degree. I mean, it's sad, and it's just, again, I'm at a loss for words, because I just makes you want to cry sometimes. I mean, it's very frustrating. My thing is, why does it always have to be that measure that they choose to use for us? And there's some way that they are easily able to apprehend white men when it comes to travesties that they're doing. I mean, you take that young man that killed all those people in the church. They took him to go get something to eat. That doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, you take the guy that just killed 2 protesters, and I forget, in Kenosha, I believe. The police tossed him some water. He had an AK or some assault rifle around him, walking toward the police with his hands up. You let me do that and see if the police go past by me. That's the kind of things that it's like, I can't stomach this anymore. I'm at the point now, I used to be an avid watcher of the news. There comes times that I have to take a break from the news because it's that devastating to me. And it becomes this thing that is really starting to weigh me down. And I can't continue to stomach some of the things that I see. So I just tune out sometimes on that and try to live in the world that I'm living and do the best that I can. But it's a frustrating thing.